Okay, then welcome to this panel. My name is Nicola Pontana. I'm the country manager for the World Bank. And in the past, we spoke quite a bit about growth, economic growth. In fact, in other panels this year, the topic of growth was fleshed out. But today, we want to focus more on jobs. And of course, ideally, we would like the patterns of economic growth to be job-intensive, job-rich, and so ideally growth should generate jobs, so it's about the quantity of a job, but not only the quantity, also the quality of jobs. And when we speak about Serbia, and we've been speaking about Serbia this year, but also in our publications and interviews, we always highlight that Serbia had maintained good macroeconomic stability. It posted decent growth rates, insufficient to converge fast, as we know, with the European Union. That unemployment has dramatically also declined in the last few years. But then when we look at more depth at the labor market, we see that there are still challenges emerging. I mean, we often speak about the mismatches between the demand and supply of labor in the labor market. We hear from entrepreneurs lamenting, complaining about the lack of qualified or semi-qualified workers. There is a debate whether wages have been going up too quickly, and according to some, they outstripped productivity in Serbia. The reservation wage of some segments of the labor force is quite high also. There's also questions about the education system, whether the outcomes are robust in Serbia, whether the education system is geared towards, especially on the tertiary education segment, the needs of the labor market of today and also of the future. Of course, the topic of jobs is also linked to the business environment. We know that the private sector is the generator of jobs, no matter what level of income is the economy. So the business environment is very, very important. So we will focus on some of these issues with our distinguished panel. Let me first introduce them. We have Amalia Pavic. She's the Deputy Executive Director of AmCham in Serbia, so welcome. Richard Record is our lead economist for the Western Balkans based in Vienna. Lazar Šestović is our senior country economist here based in Belgrade, and Bodin Bulatović is country officer for Serbia and the Western Balkans for the IFC, also based in Belgrade. So Richard, perhaps let's start with you. And of course, jobs is the new North Star for the World Bank Group, and our president, Ajay Banga, has emphasized the need for job creation. And he noted that there are 1.2 billion young people entering the workforce in the next decade and competing for approximately 400 million jobs. And certainly this is a topic that resonates with policymakers no matter what the country's level of development is. So perhaps tell us a little bit, why is this topic so important, and how have you seen this priority shaping up in the project that we deliver, in the analytical work that we do at the World Bank? Then we will delve down more on Serbia-specific questions.
Okay, no, thanks a lot, Nicola. Yeah, so jobs is clearly the sort of North Star, as you mentioned, in a lot of the development thinking right now. I think it perhaps comes from the realization or appreciation that growth is important, but growth is not enough. Of course, without growth, it's very hard to see jobs, but even with growth, if it's not the right type or with the right complementary policies, there are risks of jobless growth or growth that doesn't necessarily create the types of jobs that people need. And it's, I think, a sort of unifying call whenever finance ministers go to Washington, from the world's most advanced economies down to the most developed. They're increasingly talking about what type of jobs are being created in their economies, and thinking about sort of youth and some of the transitions around there. You mentioned this sort of big number globally. We talk about 1.2 million people entering the workforce in the next few years. On current trends, perhaps only 400 million jobs being available. I think in this part of the world, in sort of Europe, Central Asia, the challenge is perhaps less about the quantity of jobs and more about the quality. So are the region's economies able to generate the types of of jobs that will encourage people to stay in the country or to opt out of inactivity, and to stay in the workforce longer than they might do otherwise. In terms of thinking, the approach, sort of the emerging thinking, is what we call a three-pillar framework. So starting off with what we call the foundational infrastructure for jobs. That includes the basics about, connectivity, trade facilitation, the ability to sort of, absorb investment, of course, energy and energy security, but also the human capital as well as the physical capital side. Thinking about sort of skills acquisition and the evolution of educational systems given sort of changing nature of the world of work. Second, sort of moving on from that, so get the foundations in, is then what we call the sort of governance and regulatory environment. Of course, without that, it's very hard to attract the sort of higher quality of investments. I'm sure Mali will talk a little bit more about that as well. And that includes everything from sort of the way the competition, the business environment, the way state enterprises behave, and the innovation ecosystem, the ability to attract higher quality investments. And then a lot of the discussion that's been going on the last few days about selective use of industrial policies and the extent to which that may or may not support sort of higher quality investments coming in. And then thirdly, the sort of glue that holds it all together is the extent to which private capital is mobilized. We all know you can't sort of public sector your way to more and better jobs. The risk, of course, and we heard that a lot, I think, in yesterday's sort of keynotes about, targets for average wages and so on. But in the end, it's the government can create some amount of jobs and it can set minimum wages, but the real driver is private investment and particularly productivity. And this risk that we've been talking about over the last few days, that if wages rise a lot faster than productivity in Serbia and elsewhere, then there's a real risk to competitiveness. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. So that's very useful. So how would you apply then this framework to the Western Balkans? What are the key issues in the Western Balkans when we think about jobs? What are the data telling us? What would be the priority for policymakers in the region?
So I think the big sort of challenge hanging, the sort of dark cloud, if you like, is the fact we estimate by 2050 the Western Balkans will lose about 19% of the working age population on current trends. That's partly aging, but also sort of continued patterns of migration. And the opportunity is that can be at least offset temporarily by higher activation. It's not that we don't have a stock of human capital, it's that participation rates are relatively low. We know they've been rising, still reaching about 55% in the Western Balkans as a whole. That's still well short of the EU averages. And then striking rates of youth unemployment, I think between 20 to 30% in the Western Balkans. And of course, this is the most educated segment of the workforce. It takes an awfully long time to get into productive employment in the region. And then we see, for both men and women, very rates of early retirement and opting out of the labor force. So this kind of utilization function is well below potential, and I think that offers a lot of opportunities. And then even when you look at the sort of, skills acquisition is improving, still some way to go, but, when you look at sort of the overall skill set of the workforce, it's clearly better now than it was, could be better than it should be. But even then, when you look at tertiary educated graduates across the Western Balkans, we find that on average, I think only 39% of their time is spent in what we call non-routine analytical tasks. So clearly some sort of mismatch is there between the types of jobs that are being created, the types of skills that the workforce is coming, and that's where we end up with this sort of paradox where every time you talk to the private sector, they say, I can't find the people, and every time you talk to sort of young people, they say, I can't find a job. So something is not quite matching there. And that's the sort of universal problem I think we see across the region.
Thanks, Richard. Let's maybe go into you, Lazar, moving to Serbia a little bit. We heard yesterday Minister Mali talking about the remarkable economic record of Serbia in the last decade or so. We ourselves have spoken about it before, and among one of the points that he raised was the historical low levels of unemployment today in Serbia. Now, if we look at the trends, let's say vis-a-vis a couple of decades ago, unemployment is halved, and does it mean that the job is done in the country? And pardon the pun. And what are the key policy issues that concerns jobs creation in Serbia, according to you?
Minister Mali is right in what he was saying about the labor market. This is a totally different situation compared to when we did the last growth report in 2019. For instance, back then, we were internally discussing, debating what to do in the country with 24 or something unemployment rate with participation of a little over 60%. So it was a very different environment and very different ideas and thoughts. In the meantime, what happened is indeed unemployment rate is now stable or at around 8-9% from quarter to quarter. And importantly, labor force participation overall is now close to the level of the European Union. So it is about 70%. So this is, and it's slightly higher than in the rest of the Balkans. So these are really great results. This is something that I can say maybe it was difficult to project just 5-6 years ago. And now we have different topics, whether wages are too high, do we need immigrants, what is the immigration policy? And so totally different discussion that we are having just a couple of years later. However, behind these general headline numbers, total unemployment rate, total employment rate, there are all sorts of small and not so small problems that are hidden behind it. So we have parts of the country where unemployment is much higher. We have sectors where we actually see layoffs, so jobs destruction. We see certain age categories like Richard mentioned for the Balkans, the same for Serbia, youth unemployment of around, let's say, 25%. Labor force participation among female lower significantly than for male part of the population. So all these indicators suggest that the job is not done and the agenda remains big. And now we need to see how to address those challenges. So this is now more about targeted policies, geographically or sectoral, or it is about education sector reform. There was just one amazing panel just before this one on education sector reforms. And this is a call for a comprehensive set of actions for a broader, bigger picture in order to address these problems that are at the moment maybe hidden behind these good headline numbers.
You spoke about the fact that labor force participation for the youth and female is low in Serbia, and also there is scope to, especially when we compare it to the European Union. I mean, without wanting to get into the details of the policies, but any ideas? I mean, what could be some of the policies that the government could put in place to favor, to increase the labor force participation of these categories and also of minorities? We don't speak about that, but also there is a sort of wasted human capital that can be used, especially considering that people are leaving Serbia and other Western Balkan countries. There's immigration and brain drain, yet you're not using your human capital at full capacity. I mean, does it have to do with tax incentives? Is it got to do with what, in your view? And also I'm intrigued, again, sorry to put you on the spot, about this geographical immobility, I would say, of labor, no? And why is that the case? I mean, what can be done?
Yeah, there are many problems and challenges. I think that let's first maybe start with the education system. I think the first problem is the gap that exists in in the coverage by preschool education that is offered by the government. So at the moment, I think the attendance rate among preschool children is about 67-8%. In European Union is above 90%. So if you don't provide a reasonable preschool education, then you are preventing a lot of female to work and to participate actively in the labor market. So this is, for instance, one significant reform and an effort that should be done combined by by local governments and by the central government. Then comes something that is more about the youth unemployment. This is about the way flexible forms of employment work. How easy it is to hire someone to help you only on Fridays and Saturdays, for instance, if you're a restaurant owner and you need help over the weekend when you are busier than usual, and you don't want informally to get someone working for you because you don't want to risk your entire business, for instance. So these flexible forms of employment, temporary short-term jobs, seasonal jobs, could be and should be regulated in a much more streamlined manner. And then comes the issue of taxes. How is this taxable, this income, how much, who is paying those taxes, etc. As you see, each of these problems that we identified requires some thinking and some estimates, and again, a coordinated effort of different parts of the government, different levels of the government, in order to see meaningful results.
Thank you, Lazar. Let's move to Amalia. We said it in the introduction that the private sector is, the main provider of job worldwide, and we often say that in Serbia it is the small and medium enterprises really that are creating jobs, But we also often say, and we heard it in several panels here in the Kopane Business Forum, including the two on Sundays, that the domestic private sector in Serbia is hindered, is a tiger in the cage, is not delivering, is delivering below potential. So what is holding back domestic private investment in Serbia? What are the key constraints from the point of view of the private sector, and what are your members telling you? And I don't know whether we have a visual also, a slide that might go on.
We will, but thank you very much for addressing me that question, because the premise that domestic private investments are not enough is often heard, but it's often heard that what foreign investors want is subsidies and nothing else. My association is American Chamber of Commerce. We have 270 members. 2/3 of them are foreign investors. And I'm going to show you some data. We have an annual business survey that we do, an annual business confidence survey that we do once a year for the last 13 years, so we have some nice trends as well. Since our membership is actually large, and some medium companies, we are making also a comparative sample of micro and small local companies. So you will see how that fares. If I can have the slide, first slide, just to show okay. So as you can see, this is from the last year. So you can see that reducing corruption is the #1 priority for improving business environment, and it's not just last year. It has been so first two, reducing corruption and efficient judiciary and rule of law, have been topping our surveys for the last 7 years. And it's not just, as I said, AmCham members, which are in red, but also micro and small companies. So institutional reforms are something that we definitely see are not moving at the pace they should be. Also, reducing gray economy. We had a period from 2016 when the gray economy was reduced thanks to good activities of the inspections and reform of the inspection system. However, since the beginning of 2020s, we have surge in gray economy. And this is not just because the apparatus is not working, but it's not adapting fast enough for the new methods of sale. For example, internet sale has exploded during COVID, as you very well know. So you can imagine how it is for the, inspection, for example, for medicines that doesn't have enough computers to staff them within the ministries where they work, to oversee online market of medicines. This is the additional problem with regards to the capacity. Something that is always highlighted by the small companies a bit more is more flexibility in the labor relations. Don't get me wrong, big companies would also like more changes in the labor law. I mean, we have currently labor regulations administration that is the only administration that cannot be signed by e-signature. So e-document has been passed 2017, I think, and we are almost 10 years after, and we cannot sign labor documentation with electronic signature. Not to talk about more flexible ways of working, not to talk about, let's say, short jobs, mini jobs, not to talk about remote work, regulation of the remote work, flexible work, platform work. I mean, this is all that definitely that we need, and we really hope that as we hear that this government is going to change the law, we really think that this is the time to get it right and not to get it wrong, because it can also go into the different, let's say, part of the spectrum and be actually more burdensome. And this is something that we would not like to see for sure. These reforms, as I said, you can see the others too. Bigger firms usually depend more on external markets. So access to the EU, to the single market, to the regional markets, removing trade barriers is more important to them than to the small companies. But predictability of regulatory changes, it was always our question. This is something that big companies and investors really appreciate, you know, that you have predictability, what laws you're going to have and how are you going to comply. We were always perplexed by the fact that small companies are not saying, I mean, only 20-something% say that this is an issue. What they're saying is that we cannot cope. We cannot, with the new regulations, we cannot cope. We come at the point when we have to comply, when the inspection is on our doors, and then we understand what was supposed to be our compliance, let's say 6 months ago, since all our laws have a very short period of coming into force. So the general, I would say, to sum up, I would say the general unpredictability by the system, by the state system, in terms of not enough quality of the institutions for the functioning market. Is one thing, and also on the cost side, these are issues like taxes, like let's say tax wedge on small wages, which is really, by comparative examples, something that our country should fix. So this is in a nutshell, these are the main constraints.
Thanks, Amalia. And follow-up question for you. And in terms of the unmet demands for institutional reforms, because you mentioned them, that dominate the business environment, what does your survey say in the last 7 years?
As I said, two reforms that are always at the top are anti-corruption and judiciary. And the efficiency of the judicial system. When we ask the companies what are the biggest problems in the judicial system, number one thing they say is efficiency. They also say specialization of judges. They also say unified rulings, etc. But if you compare, let's say, 2/3 of the companies actually say that the efficiency is the biggest thing. In 2019, since it started from 2018 in our survey, and from 2019, we were doing a project and a series of roundtables with judges and with the ministry and also with the representatives of the private sector. And one of the conclusions was that quick fix is e-court. E-court system is the electronic court system is let's say, one thing that increases transparency and increases expediency of the processing of the cases. There were even, I think, EU funds and EU projects who had the capacity to support it also, because, I mean, when you introduce something like that, you also need software backup, hardware backup, and all this. Since then, nothing much has happened, and all of these projects have gone away. We know that the government, that the current Minister of Justice, we met with him and he has a good will to do so, but there are other priorities on the investment agenda of the government. So we are really hoping that we are not going to mark a 10th anniversary for introducing such a one easy thing, such an as an e-court system. This is, for example, this is one example.
A quick fix would be, yeah, it's quite telling. We've been discussing in the past couple of days how the governance environment, institutions, binding constraints on Serbia's economic growth when it emerges forcefully from what the private sector, the domestic private sector is telling you. So private sector is always a good barometer, and it's always good to go to them and trying to understand the concern for us that are thinking about, you know, how do you advise the government on different policies. Speaking of which, Bodin, IFC, it's all about creating sort of a conducive environment for the private sector. So how do you see the binding constraints? What would be the top policy advice that you would give the government? And how can you make a catalytic difference in attracting, mobilizing private capital with your activities?
Thank you very much, Nicola. And I think, I mean, getting into that and promoting growth, creating new jobs, it's $1 million, if not $1 billion question. And it's one of the recurring themes of this and the previous business forum. In the sense that one of the underlying themes that have gone through a lot of these discussions is that Serbia's previous engine of growth, which was based fundamentally on the FDI, is running out of steam. And how can we attract this and substitute this with new jobs going forward? Now, nobody knows the exact right answer, of course, and this is like putting together a stew. There's millions of ingredients. Some will focus on tax incentives. Others will focus on judiciary or labor reforms. Us, from a purely private sector perspective, or IFC as the largest development organization or development finance institution aimed exclusively at the private sector, what we see, and this is also something that we need to change, is that we're not here only to finance growth or finance companies, but rather scale it up. Scale up the growth, bring in new investors, and push the boundaries of the market, not just replace and displace capital that's already existing in the markets. What does this mean for Serbia? Serbia is one of the most, has one of the most a lot of potential in its export-oriented growth. When I say this, there's a lot of companies in agribusiness, food processing, logistics, and IT as well, where these Serbian companies could easily compete on global markets. But there's constraints. After a certain period, they plateau, and they plateau due to a number of reasons. The ones that we perceive from our perspective is this is lack of access to cheap capital or long-term capital, because what we see a lot of these companies, especially the smaller companies that need to be competitive on European or global markets, they're taking on short-term loans, and already in day one they're thinking about how they're going to refinance or put together a new financial structure to pay back this loan in the early months of the financing. What they need is to focus on the exports, to focus on their product, making sure that they're competitive, and then capital should come in second. What we as IFC try to do, and it is a difficult, let's say, objective, especially in this part of the world, which is higher income countries, and there's a lot of competition in terms of capital, but there's small fragmented countries at the same time. That's one of the largest constraints. What we try to do is mobilizing. We're doing this more and more. 20, 30 years ago, IFC was doing purely own account investments. What we're doing now is mobilizing, crowding in other investors, institutional investors, banks. Last year, we funded the private sector with $66 billion, of which almost 2/3 was coming from investors that invested alongside us. What this means is that for every dollar that we put down as IFC, we bring in another $2 almost from institutional investors or co-investors that it's not only about that one-off transaction where they're going to put their money in a deal. It's that now they're liberated, they've pushed their barriers, they're more secure going forward. Next time they're going to do it on their own. So let's say a German investor will no longer need IFC to participate in a deal in Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro down the line. So kind of to sum up your answer, and I know I didn't really answer on what the government should do because I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's a very difficult one. If we go back to the stew, exactly. I mean, personally, I feel that those same incentives, or at least a portion of the incentives that were allocated to FDI, should in a form be reallocated now to promote SME growth together with IFIs like us or grant institutions like EU to make sure that their export capacity is maximized. And this, in the long term, leads to high productivity growth, which in turn leads to better wages, and the outcome is better jobs.
All very good points. Let me switch gears now, perhaps, and go back to the growth question. Richard, coming back to you. You know, the economists used to say, well, you know, the most effective way to create jobs is to, you know, promote economic growth. There will be, yes, there can be growth without jobs, but there is no growth. It's going to be very difficult to create opportunity. And so we heard a lot of arguments on the lack of convergence of the Western Balkans with the EU and ways in which this country can grow faster. So you said it on Sunday, we discussed it yesterday also with Milica Uvalic, who was here with us. And what is there more that we can say? I mean, what are the risks and opportunity on the growth front facing the Western Balkans?
Sure. So yeah, it might not be sufficient, but it certainly is necessary. If we want to improve the jobs outlook, then you need to have growth. I mean, it's not that the Western Balkans is not converging with the EU, it's just happening painfully slowly, right? So this year, maybe 3% probably for the region, the EU maybe 1.4, 1.5, so we're talking about decades rather than, you know, and our youthful job entrants who are trying to find those sort of productive, mentally stimulating jobs are going to have to wait an awfully long time. So you know, what would it take? And of course, you have to look at beyond the current business cycle. We know growth is sort of, this year was particularly low in Serbia, but thinking about potential growth over the medium term, I mean, there's a few things when we look, certainly comparing the Western Balkans with the EU new member states who got in 10, 15 years ago. So institutions, we've all been talking about that. If we sort of add that up in terms of potential growth, our estimate is on average something like 0.6% of GDP would get a bump. That sort of takes Amalia's sort of chart with optimizing that for potential growth and private investment if we could not necessarily get to the world's frontier, but get to, you know, a feasible target in terms of EU new member states from 10 years ago. Similarly, in terms of economic integration, I think that's an area where we've perhaps seen better progress than the others with, again, we're talking about green lanes, trade facilitation, improved connectivity, both within the region and then from the region into the EU. But again, you know, potentially if you look at how EU new member states benefited from really frictionless trade, probably adds about another 0.5% to potential GDP growth. Education, a little bit there, maybe less, a little bit, sort of 0.2, 0.3%, partly just because it takes an awfully long time. You have to invest now to get a return in sort of 10, 15 years' time, but it is relentless and it's absolutely necessary, especially when you're thinking about sort of green and digital transitions and the sort of changing nature of work. And then finally add in, of course, often the more tangible incentive with EU accession is structural funds. You know, that we know there's significant investment coming in terms of the growth plan right now, but when you know, it's still kind of dwarfed by the sorts of capital inflows that come post-accession. So perhaps it's like a sort of a little down payment. But add all that together and you get something like 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, even 1.8% added on to potential growth. Now, of course, not all of that can happen at the same time, but gives a sense of, you know, maybe the upside in terms of the return on structural measures that's, you know, there for the Western Balkan countries.
Yeah, you mentioned the new member states, and we never tire to say from this stage that the EU continues to be a formidable convergence machine, no? Of the 30-odd countries that converged to high income since the 1990s, half of them did inside of the EU. So you've got your Uruguays, your Chiles, your Gulf countries, but the rest, the bulk of the countries that manage this transition, avoiding the middle income trap and moving from middle income to high income, actually did it within the European Union. So I really feel quite strongly about that there's now an avenue open for the Western Balkans to access the EU, and I really hope that Serbia will join the front runners, which at the moment I guess are more Montenegro and perhaps Albania.
And the world's most successful industrial policy. I mean, there's that tipping point that you get to. You don't, not even when you're in, but when the sort of tipping point when everyone in the private sector realizes it's inevitable and it's just a matter of completing those final. And you suddenly, I mean, we saw that in Poland, we saw it in Slovakia, we saw that in Croatia. There's kind of surge of investment when certainty comes, that the regulatory predictability that this country will be part of the EU in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and what that means for structural funds, what that means in trying to impose some norms around the rule of law. It is, as you say, probably the world's most successful industrial policy that's ever been.
Which is a great, given that the title of today, I mean, this year's Copernic Business Forum is indeed on industrial policy. That was an excellent addition. Lazar, growth and Serbia, another topic that we have hashed out repeatedly. And, you know, a few years back, just before Corona, you and your team produced this study, the new economic agenda for Serbia, and when you were very bullish and argued that Serbia could double its growth rate moving forward. And then 5, 6 years later, are you still so sanguine about Serbia's growth opportunity? And if yes, why, and what are the policies? I guess they're not that different from the others that Richard has mentioned for the Western Balkans, but what is the specificity of Serbia? What policies could really trigger growth here? And we know that it's been insufficient, right? We look at the last 20 years, average growth 3.2%. It's good, but it's not stellar. And as Richard was saying, at these rhythms, you will converge by the end of the century, right? So what's missing?
Well, when transition in Serbia was starting in 2001, one professor that some of us know, Mađar, remember in Koponik here exactly, he said, now we will need to run in order just to keep the distance with other countries. You know? So it's not about growing 2-3% is not an option. I think this is the message. You know, we need to run. We need to grow much faster. And the thing is that despite the fact that there are so many bottlenecks to growth, there's so many problems and hurdles, our economy is growing, you know, 2, 3, 4%, depending from year to year. But there are a couple of points that I think are very important to emphasize. First, we are a small, open economy, and as such, we are vulnerable to different external shocks. 2025 is the best example, you know. US tariffs, yet another drought, a poor agriculture season, situation with the energy companies, prices, international prices, whatnot, you know. Everything can hit us and can hit us really hard. So our growth, if you look at now the news over the previous 14, 15 months, you will see that key forecasters for Serbia revised projections for 2025 4 or 5 times. You know, it was so difficult to project. It shows you how vulnerable are our projections and expectations simply because of these external developments. The second thing that prevents and limits our growth is the massive state footprint in the economy. You know, so after all these years, we are still talking about the performance of utility companies, problems that they're facing. Every now and then, EPS comes with a request for some help, Air Serbia comes with another help, this and that. So there is always someone who is facing some problems, and of course they go back to their owners, to the government, and they are looking for subsidies, for some kind of state aid and stuff like that. And all this reduces the growth. It also reduces the competition on the market. And when you have a limited competition on the market, then private sector participants either do not enter the market at all, or have no incentive to improve their operations, to be more productive, to contribute more to the growth. So this is so the first group of problems was about these external vulnerabilities and shocks that are happening. The second is the large SOE sector. The third is maybe if we can put the graph. Yeah, so this is something that is really very interesting to see and to keep reminding ourselves. This is the share of private domestic investment in GDP. And you will see that how Serbia is continuously for a decade and more below what is typical for countries from the region. You know, so the light blue line is the Western Balkans average, and then the darker line is basic aspirational countries. These are basically new EU member states. So the gap is depending from year to year of about 5 or even more percentage points. And this is the key problem, that if we, the private sector, we as individuals or businesses from Serbia do not want to invest in our own country, in our own economy, then we cannot expect faster growth. And this is then coming back to what Amalia and Bodin were talking, about the business environment, the problems that are reappearing for years and years, same set of complaints, and then simply people are giving up and saying, okay, I tried, I waited, but it simply doesn't work, so I'm going to invest in the country next door. And this is a big, really a big problem for Serbia.
Thanks, and I guess it's a good segue into Amalia. What do you hear from your members? I mean, we spoke about growth. What are the expectations this year? What is holding back growth in Serbia? I don't know whether you also have another graph.
Yes, I have, but I want to comment just shortly on the EU accession, and thank you, Richard, for 1.7% calculation of the GDP boost. If you ask the members of the American Chamber of Commerce, they will tell you EU accession is a must, and the process is a must, because one, it installs predictability in policy making. You know what is coming ahead, so you can plan. EU is not the best and the easiest market to operate. It's overregulated and all of this, but still, you know which direction you're going to go. So you can adapt. You cannot, for climate policies implementation, you cannot do it from one year to the other. You have to plan in advance. And this comes to the second point, and that's the competitiveness. Our biggest export market is EU. We cannot, hoover around Asia or wherever else. We are naturally there. So if we want to expand our exports, and this is our lifeline definitely, we need to follow all their rules. There are a lot of their directives that have extraterritorial application, even if you do not want to, let's say, do business in their within the EU. So it's sine qua non. So I just wanted to say that, because usually when I come from MCHEM, people say, how come that you think that Serbia needs to go on the EU path faster? Why are you rooting for the EU? Because this is a common business sense. This is just one side comment, sorry for the interruption, and I'll answer to your question. We also ask our businesses whether they're going to grow next year, and if we can have the second slide. As you can see, 52% of our members actually said in the very bad year that we had previously that they're going to grow this year. This is a lot if you look at it in isolation. But look at the trend. Previous year, it's 20% down for the MCHEM members. And it's also 20% down for the micro and small companies. So only 29% of the micro and small companies said mid-year last year that they're going to grow this year. So this is the sort of the bad news. The good news is if you look at the 2023, or actually 2022, when the expectations for 2023 have been given, and this was the onset of the war in Ukraine, where it was lowest ever expectation of growth for MCHEM members. It was 40-something%. And you could see that next year it bumped to 62. So we can bounce back again, pending that external shocks and our internal mess is not progressing further.
Thanks, Amalia. Borin, let's conclude with you. Maybe two questions in one go. The first one is that you heard already the other panelists, what are the missing ingredients in the growth model of Serbia, let's say from a private sector perspective. Anything to add there? And the second one is to bring us all back to the theme of this year Copernic Business Forum, industrial policy. And we've been hearing that industrial policy is back globally. In your view, what does smart industrial policy mean for a small open economy like Serbia, and how do you go about it without, introducing further distortions into the market?
Thank you, Nicola. And I think the colleague summarized very well where we're at. That real GDP growth 3.4 is all right. It's not transformational. 40-50% income convergence with the EU. Lower total productivity growth than our peers. I mean, it's mathematically impossible to catch up to the peer group with that kind of trend. And that's just the reality. And then we have other factors that are more specific to our country, which is almost 30% informal economy, low youth participation rates, and honestly, the GDP growth is composed of mostly consumption and really not revenue generating new one-off real estate assets, which have a disproportionate high amount contribution to this GDP growth that we've been hanging onto for the last several years. But that's where we're at. Why we got there, I just want to really reflect to one aspect of why and how we got there. And for that, I'm going to need a chart that we shared. So what this is a net migration trend for Western Balkans, or let's say the Romania and Bulgaria as well, since '91. It's a compilation of a lot of migratory data. And de facto, this is, let's say, a proxy for brain drain. And what we see is that Serbia is up top, and that's Serbia's paradox, because Serbia, according to the data, has only lost about 4 or 5% of its total population. This is a fallacy, though, of course. It's a paradox because there was a huge migratory trend towards Serbia from Bosnia, Croatia, Kosovo in the 90s due to the extensive conflicts. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that these relative figures don't really show the situation that Serbia has found itself in since '91. The fact of the matter is that Serbia lost 963,000 inhabitants since '91, which is almost 1 million people. And what's even more shocking is the structure of these people. Almost 30% of Yugoslav-educated engineers left the country, which is it's something to really contemplate. And just to put this into perspective, let me go back and ask another question. What category, what product or service group is Serbia's largest export? Is it automotive? Is it electronics? 4 or 5 billion. Copper, 1.6 billion. No, it's knowledge. If you do retroactively the contribution, the foregone income of the engineers that have left the country and are providing services or goods abroad somewhere in the world, this is equivalent to between, of course it's impossible to come up with exact figures, but a bandwidth of 11.6 to 15.5 billion, almost up to 16% of the GDP. This is, even in a bad year or even on the lower trend, this is almost 4 times FDI. So this is a huge export, so to speak. It's not an export properly, but the foregone GDP growth through talent, knowledge that have been permanently outsourced. And where we find ourselves now, it's impossible to say, okay, we're going to do something to bring this back into the realm of Serbia's economy. But what can we do to replicate it so that we ensure that future generations, that ongoing generations don't do the same? And this is a persisting trend. I don't have the data for that, but I know that vast numbers of educated IT engineers are leaving the country. And without being able to offer something to these new generations, to retain them, to provide, and I'm sure that even for marginally less income, if we're talking only as an incentive, a salary, a lot would be willing to contribute to their country just to give them the opportunity, but the opportunity isn't there. So fundamentally, I mean, just to wrap up on this segment, I mean, what we as IFC try to do to tackle this, I mean, with the EU, we did this recent project, EU funded actually through the WBIF for the eco-industrial parks, is really to cluster together the export capacity of Serbia into little, let's say, I don't even want to say unions, it's not so much of a union, but like a joint capacity for them to enter European markets. It's a difficult project to do. It's going to take years, definitely, for this to reach its full capacity, but hopefully, I mean, follow the news. I guess hopefully we'll have something bombastic in the years to come. Just to reflect briefly on the other question, which you said was on industrial policy, I'll be very brief here. I think that industrial policy has become energy policy. And energy policy itself, and when we talk about energy resilience as a common topic, it's not so much energy resilience as it is capital resilience. The ability of nations and private entities to secure affordable long-term capital to build the infrastructure to make them resilient against geopolitical shocks, against changes in commodity prices, against, let's say, changes in EU policy. We know the CBAM is in effect as of yesterday or the day before. And the effects of that are only yet to be kind of felt across the economy. So it all comes down, I know it sounds like, you know, we're preaching private sector capital, but basically it does come down to that. Long-term, affordable capital to make sure that you have the infrastructure when the time comes, shelter above your roof.
Great points. Thanks, Borin. This is kind of fascinating, the graph that you put up. We have plenty of time for questions, so I cannot resist, I'm going off script here, but to ask the panel a couple of questions that have emerged during this, I mean, that I was thinking about during this chat. The first one is, you know, we've been, perhaps for the economists, but for all of you really, we've been saying that, you know, the economic model of Serbia that delivered for the country over the past 10, 15 years might be experiencing diminishing returns, not this model based on aggressive attraction of FDI and cost competitiveness. And now, of course, the cost of labor has gone up, the cost of energy has gone up, although I note that when we look at the data, Serbia is still quite competitive when it comes to the cost of electricity and gas, especially. So it's not quite the full story. But how do you see that? Do you agree with this story? And then, because, you know, part of me is like, of course, wages are going up. This is an upper middle income country and wanting to go to high income, you know. I know that some of the, you know, entrepreneurs that have invested here are complaining, but, you know, they can move their businesses and probably this business will be moved elsewhere where the cost of labor is lower. But I think it's a bit counterintuitive to think that Serbia will go back to an economy where wages are lower. No, it doesn't jive. I mean, now, the fact that they have outstrip productivity, we all agree. But anyway, so the question is this economic model sort of showing sign of fatigues, and what could be the next step? So that's one question. And the second question is, going back to your brain drain, no? And with Richard, we discussed this before. I mean, I guess as Serbia, we're preaching that Serbia needs to be in the EU, and it's true. I mean, the future of Serbia, my opinion at least, should be firmly into the European Union, and the sooner the better, really. But it is possible that as countries join the EU, the brain drain, the immigration might increase, no? And although as you were saying, if then governance and institution get stronger, you might recapture this incredible vitality of the Serbian diaspora and bring them back home. So I guess, what are your reflections on that? I mean, and whoever wants to go first on both questions, and then we open up for questions from the audience. Economic model, further brain drain for Serbia.
Okay, I mean, just a couple thoughts, and I'm sure others will too. I mean, you're right. It's, ultimately development is about improved living standards for ordinary people, and for most people that means earning more. So in a sense, that's a marker of success. The Serbia of perhaps the early 2000s was, come in and get low-cost labor, low-cost energy. Maybe a little bit unlucky on the energy side that the energy transition has come very quickly, but this is kind of a natural part of the development process. I think maybe the important point is you require a different set of policies, and maybe you can get away with certain things when you have large labor and energy cost advantages. And as those begin to be eroded and convergence starts, then it requires a more sophisticated set of public policies to encourage and facilitate both domestic and foreign investment. A sort of sense that what got you here won't get you to the next step. And that's where all these things that Amalia has mentioned, they become more and more binding as you look to, as living, incomes rise and you look to more sophisticated levels of investment. I mean, just on migration, maybe there is a sense that it might get worse before it gets better. But I always say, look, the goal is becoming Ireland, right? I mean, Ireland is the country which for hundreds of years was known as the place that kind of lost people to UK, to America. And then eventually you get to that point where people come back. And now, it's an astonishingly successful place, one of the highest per capita incomes in Europe, much higher than the UK. And, a government generates massive fiscal surpluses, now maybe not replicable on some of their industrial policies. But, there is an opportunity for a small, open economy on the periphery of Europe to become fabulously successful and get to a point where people come back. And actually, maybe it's even easier now when you think about technology sectors, right? I mean, we know one of Serbia's big comparative advantages in technology skills, ICT, and so on. That's an area where actually you can give quite an attractive offer with relatively low taxes, and people can work here rather than in Germany or Switzerland, and probably for a lower wage get a much higher take-home wage because of just the nature of technology and distance. So maybe there's some opportunities. And the reality is, you can't roll back migration, but you can make the best of it and think about network opportunities and the advantages that a diaspora brings.
Super. I love the Ireland example. Any others, Lazar or Amalia?
Yeah, I think that the growth model really needs to be changed here. I mean, this is what we had so far was more or less, if you think about the previous 25 years, always some kind of a crisis response. I mean, we had this first phase, 2001, 2008. This was basically an opening of the country, first wave of reforms. So we grew really a lot, really fast. But it was, in a sense, it was a one-off. Then we had a period of relatively slow growth in the 2010s, when different other structural problems needed to be addressed, in particular related to the functioning of the public sector, fiscal consolidation kicked in, etc. Then we had the COVID and this intervention by the government to provide a massive fiscal stimulus that helped growth, but it is one-off, So looking from this perspective, we never had really like a carefully thought through and systemic work on foundations for growth and private sector-led growth. I I'll give you, for instance, a couple of examples. Why we are still talking about, for instance, legalization of illegal constructions. We talk about it for 25 years. Why we never managed to resolve this. And this is it's a huge problem. Because this is untapped assets that could be used as a collateral. This could help to develop the real estate market, the financial sector market. It could help with internal mobility of labor within the country, etc. Second, the second statistics that is really killing me is about irrigation. In 2000, the latest data show there is a continuous decrease in irrigated area in Serbia. Each year we are suffering from droughts. Our agriculture has a negative contribution to growth. Food industry is facing increasing input prices. Inflation is going up. And knowing all this, we are reducing the area that is irrigated. And we have Danube, Sava, and all these other natural resources. So I think that we are not working hard enough on some basics, to resolve these things and to, once forever fix one, then second, and third, all the problems that are there, and benefits will be visible. Maybe not overnight, not in a year or two, but soon it will be there.
I think because yesterday somebody, I don't know, it was mentioned that we shouldn't go back to economic planning, but the EU has the 7 years budget, and I can't remember who, was it you?
A longer-term approach.
Yes, I agree. I mean, that's, I think, is the essence of what Lazar was saying. Any quick ones from, yes, Amalia?
I agree with Lazar 100%, but I just wanted to add something also from our last survey. We wanted to test because we saw that in the southern Serbia there were a couple of companies that actually closed their factories and have left because of the increase of the minimum wage. So we wanted to test how our membership is, let's say, whether that's a stress test for them or not. What it turned out was that actually only 35% of our membership has minimum wage either indexed, so minimum wage plus something, or has minimum wage at all. So less than a third. These are sectors like outsourced services, like retail, like gas stations, cleaning, this kind of stuff. Everyone else did not report a problem from increasing minimum wage. However, when we asked them, okay, on that front, what would be the problem? And they massively said higher taxation of higher salaries, because a lot of our members came to Serbia with huge IT teams, for example, that have very good competitive salaries. And if there is increased progressivity of the income tax, then they said that they would lose competitiveness in comparison with the other, let's say, comparable markets. So just as a small note.
Thank you, Amalia. We have done great with time, thanks to your conciseness, and so we can open up. We have 10 minutes from some questions from the audience. Please, you can introduce yourself, perhaps, and if you would.
Thanks. So my name is Aleksandra Drecun, and for the disclosure, I do consult for the World Bank, but I'm not asking questions in that capacity, so for the record. So you mentioned ICT, and Bodil presented a graph that is really disturbing in a way, that somehow the topic of brain drain and what is our potential in terms of the highest level of educated people is really one of the things that is that should be of concern, because I have a question for you. Can you imagine what's the remuneration or the amount of money that PhD students at the School of Electrical Engineering get? So those are teaching assistants and people that work there and support professors in those labs and some of the newly established labs in the Palace of Science. Do you have any idea? So they get around 1,000 euros. So our best and brightest that are supposed to teach our students and help us grow and be a part and actually transfer technology are offered 1,000 euros. So on that note, this is not a pledge, but just to share, we are kind of building a community of 20 companies or individuals that will top it off by 1,000. And this is kind of self-help, and Lazar mentioned that. It feels really bad that you have to do that. So that is one thing. So you, as the people that are following trends in other countries, my question is, does the bank intend to support? And I know that the bank did a lot, and perhaps also IFC in supporting research and education. There are rumors that even international peer review will be dismantled in our science fund, which would again be an issue. So what are your stakes on that, and how do you see the research and innovation field? And as angel investor in several startups, perhaps for Bodin, but also for others, what about the capital market and the issues there? I tried to send the money for convertible loan. It's not allowed. I tried SAFE. The money was returned yesterday. So there's, for investors, private capital, others, there are so many institutional barriers, even in simple transfers of money, not to mention the kind of incentive scheme. So on those two notes, research, education, higher level, and capital markets in terms of funding.
Thanks, Alexandra. Maybe let's gather a couple more, and then we can go back to the panel. Please, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Nikola Tiparmakov. I actually don't have a new question. I would just like to reiterate your question, because I didn't hear Lazar answering, because you asked him, is Lazar and his team still very much bullish on the 2019 assessment when you said that Serbia can double its growth to 7% of GDP? We had a big professional confrontation at that time, and when you presented it in 2019, we specifically asked you, we said that no country in Europe has ever grown for a generation, not even 5%, much less 7%. And we asked you, are you going to be prepared to take the responsibility 6 years from now, when this turns out to be nothing more than a fairy tale? So we are now sitting here, you were asked a question, and to be honest, you were just giving us excuses for all sorts of factors that can affect GDP growth. But you should have known that back in 2019. And still, you basically, it wasn't just a presentation, you basically published 4 or 5 booklets showing how Serbia can and should grow at 7%. So are you backing that now? Or is it just the fact that the Serbian government has done a really poor job at implementing these reforms?
Okay. I guess Lazar has become over the years a diplomat. He doesn't, a politician. He asks you a question, he doesn't answer. But in all seriousness, more questions from the audience? Or?
I would just like to add
Milica, with the mic. Okay. Thank you, sir.
There are many things that could be said, but one thing that was not mentioned in this panel is competition policy, which is fundamental. In the early 2000s, the government was late to set up an antitrust authority. It was done only in 2005. Later on, this agency had no force at all. The laws have been changed in the meantime, but still today you do not have a competitive environment in Serbia. And it is well known that it is the big enterprises that are in a better position than the small and medium-sized enterprises, which lack the type of support that the big firms have, and also linked to the sectoral structure of the economy. You have sectors where you still have monopolies, so that stops growth.
Absolutely, no, fully agree. Okay, back to the panel. Lazar, growth 7% or 6% maybe, or I will say something maybe later on about that too. And then there were questions about capital markets, innovation, research and development ecosystems, competition, I guess all relevant and pointy. So over to you guys.
Well, just to remind everyone, when we did that report in 2019, our colleague, one member of our team, did an academic paper on possible growth. She developed a model to estimate the possible growth of one country if it wants to and is able to replicate institutions in aspirational country. So she did that work, if I remember, for Argentina and Spain, if I remember correctly. Again, don't quote me, this was a bit a long time ago. And so she explained to us this paper, and we were all like, wow, fantastic, can we do something for Serbia like that? And she was like, yes, of course. So there are 6-7 areas of reforms. And she asked us, okay, so what is your target country? What your citizens, which country like most? So we were like, Germany is the myth of efficient and rich country. So she said, okay, we can do that. So let's see, over the 30 years period, if I remember again correctly, to converge, so to have the same education system like in Germany, to have the same health system, same competition authorities, same financial markets as in Germany, what would be the growth in Serbia? But in 30 years, with all the same institutions like in Germany, it would be 7%. So this was like an academic exercise of trying to see what would be the impact of improving institutional framework in your country that you are looking at, and if possible to replicate some aspirational countries. So that was the logic behind the calculation, and that was the result. And we used it, primarily to inspire discussions like this, like we had today, to show that much more needs to be done, and if it is done correctly, then benefits can be significant. That decade we had a growth of just slightly above 1%, almost a flat GDP for a decade, and it was very hard to convince anyone that Serbia can grow faster or should grow faster, And when you have such an environment, then you cannot really discuss the reform agenda. You cannot set targets. If everyone says, there is no growth, then how you can stimulate the discussion about possible reforms, possible actions. And the growth, we had from between 2001 and 2008, we had growth of almost 7%, 6.9, I believe the average growth was. So it's not something unthinkable. Also, going even a little bit further back, we had some discussion. Serbia was growing for 25 years without a recession from late 60s, 70s up until early 80s. And average growth was over 5%. For 25 years. And so these are possible scenarios, hypothetically, and of course, some different environments, but it's not something that is totally unthinkable for our economy. And especially having in mind the education, this is what Bodin was also mentioning, capacities and capabilities that used to be existent here in terms of human capital, in terms of technology, and if you add on that the geographical location, access to big markets, etc., one needs to be optimistic and also needs to be demanding if you want. We all should expect more from this economy and have higher expectations and be more optimistic.
Thanks, Lazar. Richard and I also published a paper not long ago, also drawing from IMF and data and some other authors showing that the Western Balkans, if they achieve the same level of institutional development of new member states, the same level of trade integration, amount of structural funds and human capital, they could almost double also, not quite double, but they can, I can't remember exactly the figure, but I think it was from an average of 4.5% to a 6.4, you can add almost 2%. And then again, it's done in that sort of spirit that Lazar said. It's good to be ambitious. The potential is there. What are the best policies that you can identify in order to to take advantage of that potential. Anything else? I mean, we're running out of time, but capital markets, innovation, very quickly, any final thoughts? Capital markets, maybe?
Maybe, yeah, capital markets real quick. It's, so IFC works in 180 countries around the globe, basically, and we take every jurisdiction, every regulatory environment is different. What we do signal to each and every country is how they can improve their environment. For Serbia, it boils down to some things that may not seem like an immediate, that like they would jump growth to 7% or something like that, but for example, having an MFI law. Serbia is the only country that doesn't have an MFI law in the Western Balkans. Virtually no private credit institution apart from banks, which is basically what this economy needs, more than private equity. Furthermore, this is great. I mean, together we're supporting the corporate bond issuance program, which is gaining traction slowly. We're also urging the authorities to allow Eurobond issuances in the future to attract a much larger audience of potential investors from Euro-based economies. There's much less appetite for local denominated RSD long-term bonds. So this is just to give a quick glimpse into, we're aware of the regulatory environment, we persistently communicate, and hopefully we will one day act in an environment that's more conducive to capital activity.
With that, thank you so much to the panelists, and thanks to the audience as well, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day or a rest of the stay in Kopernik Business Forum. Thank you so much.